'Tis the season for bulletin inserts. I just wanted to call your attention before we get started. Last week we were kicking off this series on discipleship and talking about different aspects of discipleship that God would love to see abundant in our lives. And so there's a list that we passed out last week. If you weren't here, you didn't get it. We have extra copies in the narthex of 40 different aspects of discipleship. And we've asked you to take some time at home to meditate over it, read over it, maybe put a star next to 5 of these things which you think are abundant in your life, and a circle around 5 of the things that you'd like to see more of in your life, and 5 things that you might commit to allowing God to work with you on over the next 10 weeks as we go through the disciple course. And at the same time, we've done this a number of times before, but as we're heading into Lent, probably the single best thing we can do for our discipleship with Christ is to spend time in conversation with God, to set aside a particular time where we read God's Word, we soak in the love letters that God has written to us for us and our life and our own edification, and then also to spend some time in prayer, in conversation with God, talking to God, being quiet and allowing God to talk to us. Any relationship that we are ever in takes time. And it takes opportunities to just sit and be together. And the same goes for our relationship with God. And if we are hoping to grow into these people that God has created us to be, then spending time with God is an essential part of that. Inside your bulletin is this little blue insert. If you would be interested, you can either start today or start on Ash Wednesday. But through Easter, if you would be interested in making a commitment to at least read one chapter in the Bible, and there's some different books in here that we make suggestions for, but really you can start anywhere. One chapter in the Bible, read through, and spend at least a little bit of time in prayer. You can probably do that in 5 to 7 minutes a day. The reason we do this over and over again is because we keep hearing stories back from people who say that this has completely changed their life. Over and over again, I'll hear a year later, 2 years later, I started reading the Bible and praying back in 2012 when you were talking about this, and I'm still doing it today, and there is nothing that has had a better influence on my life than that one little discipline. So if it's something that you would be willing to do, they say it takes 30 days to create a habit. So if you'd be willing to make a commitment either from today forward or Ash Wednesday forward through Lent to spend at least 5-7 minutes every day reading a chapter in the Bible and praying, you could fill one of these out and put it in the offering plate when it comes around. You don't need to fill one of these out, but if you do, then I would love to be praying for you as you are doing that. So those are those 2 things. Today, as we begin talking about different aspects of discipleship, we decided we would start with a doozy and a whopper. And so I'd like to read to you from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 18. Then Peter came and said to him being Jesus, "Lord, if another member of the church sins against me, how often should I forgive? As many as 7 times?" Jesus said to him, "Not 7 times, but I tell you, 77 times. Other translations say 7 times 70 times. For this reason, the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who wished to settle accounts with his slaves. When he began the reckoning, one who owed him 10,000 talents was brought to him. And as he could not pay, his lord ordered him to be sold, together with his wife and children and all of his possessions, so that the payment could be made. So the slave fell on his knees before him, saying, 'Have patience with me, and I will pay you everything.' And out of pity for him, the lord of that slave released him and forgave him the debt. But that same slave, as he went out, came upon one of his fellow slaves who owed him 100 denarii. And seizing him by the throat, he said, 'Pay me what you owe.' Then his fellow slave fell down and pleaded with him, 'Have patience with me, and I will pay you.' But he refused. And then he went and threw him into prison until he should pay the debt. When his fellow slaves saw what happened, they were greatly distressed, and they went and reported to their lord all that had taken place. Then his lord summoned him and said to him, 'You wicked slave, I forgave you all that debt because you pleaded with me. Should you not have had mercy on your fellow slave as I had mercy on you?" And in anger, his Lord handed him over to be tortured until he should pay his entire debt. Yeah. There we go. You know, there are some sermons that weigh more heavily on me than others. As we start this 10-week series in discipleship, we thought that we would just go ahead and jump both feet in to the deep end to get started. Because there probably is no more important subject to God or to us that we should ever talk about than this subject of forgiveness. It is the greatest gift that God has to give us. It is what lies as the cornerstone at the very heart of our faith. And it is the thing that God is most longing to see us be able to offer one another in our lives as well. Our God is a God of relationships, and God's greatest desire in our life is to see us live with healthy, deep, thriving relationships. But it's hard, isn't it? Because we hurt each other. We let each other down all the time, don't we? Most often, it's the people that we're closest to that we hurt the most, who hurt us the most. Even here in church, we have baggage, we have issues. We're like two porcupines trying to hug each other. And we rub up against each other's issues, and we push each other's buttons. And sometimes we do it by accident, but can we be honest here that sometimes we do it on purpose? We twist the knife. We push that button. At times we try to hurt each other. It probably wouldn't take much for me to ask you to imagine in your mind somebody who you need to forgive. Somebody who hurt you, or who you're angry at. It probably wouldn't take much for you to have in your mind somebody who you've hurt and you need forgiveness from. This is the key fundamental issue in our faith and in our lives, and somehow I believe the two are connected. You know, if our greatest need was to have more information, God would have sent us an educator. If our greatest need was to have more money or better entertainment, God would have sent us an economist or an entertainer. If our greatest need was for new technology, God would have sent us a scientist. But our greatest need is for forgiveness. And that's why God sent to us a Savior. I feel the weight of this sermon because I know that there are some of you who are struggling with forgiving people in your life. There's some of you who are struggling with forgiving each other right here in the church. And I know that this is such an important topic, and it's one that is so much easier to preach about than it is to actually do. And I feel like I've put myself out there on a ledge a little bit. I don't know what I was thinking last summer when I titled this sermon, what I titled it here. The Secret of Forgiveness. And that's a little bit of a tall order. And then you match it with this parable, which is a odd, kind of weird little parable to start with. And I don't know that this is going to, I think I put myself into a little bit of a pickle here. I mean, this parable, I don't completely get it. We have Peter, it starts off with Peter approaching Jesus saying, "Teacher." I have a friend who has hurt me. I mean, they really hurt me. They knew what they were doing, and they did it anyway. And now I know what you're going to say, because I can hear it already. I know you're going to tell me that I need to forgive him. But here's the catch. This is not the first time. This has become a bit of a habit. This is his MO. He does this to me over and over again. So what I need to know is, how many times am I expected to forgive him? As many as 7 times? Now, what's really interesting there is that Jesus and Peter and everyone listening would have known exactly what the scriptures say. The scriptures are very clear. It says that a Jewish person is expected to forgive another Jewish person up to a maximum of 3 times. So Peter is actually being extremely magnanimous here. I mean, he's doubling the amount that they're expected to do and adding 1 for good measure. How about 7 times? And then Jesus, who in these parables sometimes he kind of sounds like Yoda to me. I don't know if you've ever picked up on that. But he's like, forgive him not 7 times you must, but 77 times, or 70 times 7 times, or 4, not whatever it is. And then he launches into this pathetic little parable. There's 3 parts to this story. The first part is this king who forgives his slave this gargantuan debt. And the scholars actually don't know exactly what a talent was. They know it was the largest sum of money that anyone ever talked about. But different scholars, some think it's sort of the typical wage of a typical worker for 1 year. Some think it's much, much more than that. What we do know is that King Herod's salary was 90 talents a year. And that the typical income from taxation in Galilee was only 100 talents a year. So 10,000 talents for a slave to pay back 10,000 talents, this was absolutely impossible. It was really, really clear. This was at least millions and millions, if not billions of dollars that this slave owned. And yet the king wipes the slate clean. The second part of the story is that the slave goes out and then he runs into a fellow slave who owes him 100 denarii. Again, they're not sure exactly what that is, but many scholars believe it's probably the equivalent of a couple months' worth of work, something that certainly could have been paid back. And the second slave asks for forgiveness as well, but the first slave won't and throws him in jail. And so the third part is when the king hears about this, he gets so enraged that he throws that first slave in jail where he's tortured and isolated for the rest of his life. Let us thank God for his word. The reason I'm being silly about it is because it's just so different from everything else I understand throughout the scriptures about Jesus and about God's understanding of forgiveness. That it's not something that we only receive when we're worthy of it, that God's forgiveness comes as a completely free gift. So I don't understand what's going on there. I mean, there's nowhere else. Well, I guess every Sunday morning, what do we say? Forgive us our debts as... But I'm not sure that I understand what's going on here. What is the secret to forgiveness? And what is the secret to trying to understand this strange parable? And I do want to give you a little spoiler alert that I do think that there is a twist in this parable that not only makes the parable make more sense, but really does unlock the secret of all forgiveness in our lives. And so let me start by trying to figure out what is forgiveness by talking about what it isn't. First of all, forgiveness is not an exercise in excusing wrongs. Do you understand that? Forgiveness is not an exercise in excusing wrongs. If there is an excuse for what you've done or what someone has done to you, if there is a reason for it, there's no need for forgiveness. Do we understand that? That forgiveness is something that we give as a free gift when there is no excuse. We are masters of trying to rationalize things, of trying to make excuses for things, of trying to make things look better on the outside and to the people around us than they actually are, of trying to place the blame on someone else. I love the story of the fifth grade boy who's bringing home a report card full of F's, and he's scared to death to show it to his family. He's trying to figure out all day when he's going to show it to his mom and his dad, and so he waits until after dinner when his mom has cooked this wonderful home-cooked meal, and he praises her and praises her skill as a cook, and then he slips the report card across the table. And the mom and dad pick it up and take a look, and their jaws drop to the floor as they just see F, 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 F. But before they can even react or open their mouths to say anything, the little boy says, "So Mom, Dad, what do you think it is? Genetics or environment?" We love to deflect. We love to place blame everywhere else, and yet one of the most beautiful things about this faith of ours is that we can be honest. We can say, I blew it, I messed up, I failed, I hurt you, and I had no business hurting you. Forgiveness is not an exercise in excusing wrongs. It's also not, and I don't know where it's also not tied with forgetting. Everyone always says, they always put these two things together, like they're somehow eternally, inextricably bound together. This whole idea of forgiving and forgetting. They are two totally separate things. At times it's appropriate to forgive and forget, but at times it's impossible to forget. It's always appropriate to forgive, but at times we can't forget. There are times where it's irresponsible to forget. I remember being flabbergasted. A couple years ago, I was reading an article that was written by a psychology professor at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. And in this article, she was arguing that Holocaust victims should never, ever forgive anything, any of the perpetrators, any of the people, any of what happened, because these victims owed it to the world to make sure that the world never forgot the Holocaust. That is terrible psychology. Terrible psychology. Because yes, we should never forget the Holocaust. But that doesn't mean that we can't forgive. If we tell these people that they're not allowed to forgive, then not only do we force them to have been prisoners in the concentration camps during the Holocaust, but we force them to be prisoners inside of their own bitterness and resentment for the rest of their lives. Forgiving and forgetting are two very separate things. And while we're at it, so is forgiving and reconciliation. When they go together, that's wonderful. When we can forgive each other and a relationship can be reconciled and healed, that is a beautiful, wonderful thing. But even when relationships can't or shouldn't be reconciled, it is still always the right thing to forgive. Sometimes it's impossible to reconcile. Sometimes it's not the right thing when a woman's been abused in her home for years and years and she finally gets the courage to leave her abuser and go get help. There is a hard rule that she will never fully recover until she is able to forgive. But that doesn't mean she needs to go back and strike up a new relationship with her abuser. There are times when people don't want our forgiveness. There are times when people don't accept our forgiveness. There's times when they have no idea that they need to be forgiven, and yet we can still forgive them. There are times when people are dead, and we'll never have a chance to reconcile that relationship, but we can still forgive them in our heart. And when we do, there is an incredible release, an incredible freedom waiting for our souls in the midst of that forgiveness. Which kind of brings me to the last thing that forgiveness isn't, and in this I think really is the key to what's going on in this parable and the key to forgiveness itself. And that is that our forgiveness is not a gift to the one who hurt us. Our forgiveness is a gift to ourselves. Our forgiveness is not a gift to the one who hurt us. Our forgiveness is a gift to ourselves. Archbishop Desmond Tutu says, forgiveness is the very best form of self-interest. Alan Paton, the South African novelist, said there is a hard rule that when we suffer a grievous injury, we will never fully recover until we are able to forgive. These men had seen firsthand what unforgiveness and bitterness and resentment could do to the human soul. The way that it could eat people alive from the inside out like some kind of insidious cancer. They had seen what the difference that it makes when people are able to embrace forgiveness, when they're able to let go, and the difference that it makes in their lives. When we refuse to forgive, when we hang on to our resentment, it doesn't hurt the one who's wronged us, one iota. It just means that we are going to rot away inside a prison of our own making. They say that unforgiveness is like drinking rat poison and then waiting for the rat to die. That it's like holding a burning hot red coal in our hand, and waiting for the one who wronged us to get burnt. What's going on with this parable? I think the twist with this parable is that this slave was already in a prison. He didn't need the king to throw him into it. That was just a technicality. Because he had not been able to receive the forgiveness from the king, he was not able to give it out to anybody else. What we do not receive, we are not able to give out. And so what I think is going on in this parable isn't so much that he's wrong for not forgiving the other slave, it's that he didn't get it. That he didn't really experience what the king had done for him. That the king had forgiven him of a debt that was so huge that if he really allowed himself to understand that and believe it and internalize it, he would have had no option other than to forgive the other slave. But because he couldn't sense it, he couldn't feel it, he didn't understand it, he didn't have to give what wasn't his to give, what he had never received. The day that I became a Christian, I think a little bit more so every day since then, I've been given this sense that I have been forgiven for so much. I mean, there's all the things that I do, but there's also, most people just see the smoke screens and the excuses and the rationalizations, but God sees inside of my heart. God sees inside the dark corridors of my brain and the twisted recesses of my heart and sees all of the motivations and the greed and the jealousy and the conceit and the vindictiveness, everything that goes on inside of me. God sees it and forgives me anyway. Loves me exactly as I am, even with the pieces I'm humiliated about, even with the pieces that I am scared and would never want to show to anyone. God sees it and knows it and loves me anyway and forgives me day after day after day after day. I am the one who has received the 10,000 talent forgiveness. The one that I couldn't work off in 1,000 lifetimes if I tried. And so it makes me just feel like, how could I not forgive those around me for the things that they do? And not only does it make it possible for me to forgive, but it makes me actually want to forgive. Because the more focused I am on what God has done for me, the more it makes me want to give that same gift to the people around me. And as I do, I find this incredible release and this incredible freedom from something that's been holding on to me and keeping me inside of my own prison. To the point where I get to the point that it's not about whether I do it 3 times or 7 times or 77 times. Because it becomes a habit. Either way, it's a habit. Either being unforgiving is a habit or being forgiving is a habit that we cultivate in our lives. And by the time we really understand what God has done for us, And by the time we allow that to really seep down into our souls, then we find that every time we forgive somebody else, the energy just grows. We become that much more free. We become that much more released. We start to feel better and better about life to the point where once we zoom past 490 times, we feel like we've hardly gotten started. I want you to watch a video, a story of a woman who lost her daughter, and it's going to be told to you through the words of a young man who's a songwriter. And when the video is done, we are going to play this song, and you're going to hear the song. And I want you to listen very carefully to the words, both as the video is played and as the song is played. We're also going to take the offering once the song starts. So ushers, don't come while the video is going on, but once the song starts, we will take the offering as well. But I want you to listen very carefully and watch very carefully to this.
Over the past few years, I've been on this journey of writing songs inspired by the real-life stories that people sent to me. This one story in particular has had a profound impact on me. It hit me kind of hard. It's about a woman who did the impossible, and it made me ask myself if I could do the same. Renee had 4 kids. 2 of her daughters were twins. Megan was coming home from the beach one night with her best friend when their car was struck by a drunk driver named Eric, a 24-year-old kid. Megan lost her life. Eric killed both girls that were in the car. Renee lost her daughter in an instant. Next thing she knows, she finds herself in a courtroom watching this young man, this 24-year-old man, get sentenced to 22 years in prison. Renee wrote to me and said, "I now have a mission that I never would have chosen." What she meant by that is that in the years that follow, she began to travel around to schools and churches and different functions, and she would speak about the dangers of drunk driving. But as the years progressed, she felt like something was missing from her presentations. And that's when God put it on her heart that she had not forgiven this man who took the life of her daughter. And so she reached out and did the impossible. She reached out to Eric in prison and said, "I forgive you." The ripple effects of that act of forgiveness are still being felt today. That young man's life was absolutely changed because this woman forgave him. He said, "I can't even forgive myself, and she forgave me." Eric said he found his eternal salvation as a result of this act. One by one, all of Renee's family members followed her lead, and they reached out and expressed forgiveness to Eric. So much so that now they describe Eric as part of their family, like a son to Renee. The story doesn't stop there though. Renee went to the courts along with her family, and she was able to have Eric's sentence cut in half from 22 years to 11 years. This blew me away. The reason she did it is so that Eric could have a second chance at life and so that he could join her in their presentations. She told me that now she shares not only about the dangers of drunk driving, but also about the power of forgiveness